Welcome, everyone. Again, thank you for joining us, and huge thank you to Matt joining us all the way from the UK late at night and before his vacation. Matt is like an expert in all things data, and I think he's going to tell us a little bit about his company and what they do with data, but we're also really going to focus on Dataverse and tips and tricks for working with data in Dataverse. So I'll pass it over to you, Matt. Whenever you're ready, you can take over the screen share.
I will do it. Right, I've got so many screens that this will take me 2 minutes to find the right screen. I'm sure we know that pain at the moment, right? So Beautiful. You should now see a slide. Now, if I shift you over to that side, then I can see chat, and then I've got this one here as well. I think I'm good to go. Now the question
That's great. Thank you.
So, yeah, I didn't bother with any posh brand or anything. The theory of this is more in the theory of what we're going to talk about than fancy slides and brand and all that sort of stuff. So please excuse the no nonsense brands on the slide on this. They are what they are. That's me, a bit about me. I'm not going to go through me too much. You'll learn about me throughout the session. That's my Twitter handle. That's the platform that I use more than anything else. So if you want to grab me, that's probably the best one. I have LinkedIn. I have all the others. I don't often read them as much as Twitter. Twitter is my time sink. So if you want to help with my time sink and get me in there, then you're more than welcome to do that. But other than that, that's me. That's enough about me. And I've worked with company Data8 for 10 years next year across hundreds of data projects. So I have seen almost everything. I've seen everything that can go wrong pretty much. And I've seen some real messes and I've seen people do it wrong. So that is what this session is. And that's how this session came to fruition. And what is the point of this session? So the point of this session is to explain to people the things that I've done that are not difficult. It is relatively easy to do certain things. There are quick wins. There are harder things to do, and where that focus should go. It's the do's and don'ts of data in Dataverse. So there is lots of theory in this. There is things that would be nice to do regardless of the platform you're in, but then there is a lot of spin on it. So specifically when you're in Dataverse as well, this is how the platform will help you solve those problems. So there is a bit of it for hopefully for everybody. There's going to be some code in there. There's going to be some low code in there. There's going to be some theory-based stuff in there. So it's just sort of little things to hopefully give you food for thought. And it used to be when I give this presentation before, I used to number the amount of tips, and it sort of grew into what it is today. That there's no point numbering it now because the things get added and removed and changed over time. So we're going to just talk. It's fairly structured, but it is quick hitting tips. You're welcome to go into chat. If I keep looking to my right, your left, then that is the chat. So I can read questions throughout there, and we can open floor it at the end of the day if we want to as well. So some key statistics, because once I had presentation training and somebody told me you should have some statistics on there. So I do that, and then always make a point of saying that someone told me to do this. And ultimately, Gartner claimed that $9.7 million per year is the average financial impact of poor data quality. And then in the US, 3.1 trillion annually. There is obviously much more in-depth analysis in both of these articles if you were ever to read them. But I've done the typical news headlines scaremongering that people do online and stole the headline figures of them. But the point is that the numbers are very high, and data quality is a big thing across most businesses. And the first way I always try and start this generally is that this is your problem. People will look at the problem and say that it's not. This is nothing to do with me. This is somebody else's issue. If you've even had to really have that thought at some point, then it probably is going to be your problem in some area. It is also the person that sits next to you or sits across you digitally is their problem as well. And ultimately, it's everybody's problem. So what you really need to do is get this idea of shared ownership and all care about data and wherever it comes from and wherever it lives. If you can have any opinion, any say, any influence on it whatsoever, then do that. Even if it's just doing your own best practices, if people see you do them, then they also follow suit. And what we can do with the problems, and this is something that I've seen happen, and generally the more successful projects will start with this, is that they'll have someone own it. They'll have a data quality steward, or they'll have somebody who is just gone that little step more than everybody else and said, yeah, let's do something about this. And if this session makes one person think, then that they can put a few steps in place, then ultimately that's the aim, right? That's the aim, to try and make it a little bit better than when you first started. So one of the things that I always like to make people do is have a minimum data standard. What would you like to see in your system? Before you're even going to think about the ways you're going to solve that problem, write your wish list of what you actually care about and what you really want, and with a priority order. So the example I give there is middle name really as valuable as phone number? Chances are probably not. So work through your list, work through your data, and just decide where is worth focusing on your attempts. The caveat is that in very exceptional circumstances, there probably is people where that isn't their problem, but I don't often come across them anymore. Everybody at some point or another has had issues with data or has data integrity, be it in depends what you're looking at. So a different perspective on that was that my job today was I was analysing my physical asset register for our ISO accreditation, which sounds like a very boring sentence, but ultimately that is a spreadsheet that contains data that I had to ensure was correct and valid. So think about what data is as well. It isn't just first name, last name. So going back to a point I mentioned earlier, you need to build up trust in the data. I think this is ultimately, this whole presentation needs to give you more options that will help you give trust to the people that are using that data. And if people see that it's trustworthy, and if people are very conscious that they'll go in and they go to a record and that phone number, it's in there, rings, and it is the person that it says it is, then they have more natural incentive to keep that up. So if they were to ring, if they were to try and ring Kylie, for example, and then someone said, no, she's moved her role now, if you knew that was accurate and you were pretty good, you would hopefully then take that and go, okay, well, I'll update that record, I'll deactivate it, or I'll change it, or do whatever my processes are and keep that up. Whereas if you're getting sick of ringing people and you know they're not there, then you just go, oh, somebody else has done this, so I'm just going to carry on with it. So one of the things that I always like to try and do and promote where you can is, if data quality is a thing within you and you want to make it work within a team, if you can put it in performance reviews, if you can put it into discussions, if you can, I'm going to say name and shame, but I don't mean name and shame, but I think you get what I'm saying there. Is an incentive, and it's trackable, and it's incentivized maybe, because it's very, very hard for data to be input into your system that is invalid without somebody knowing that was invalid. So they might just be guessing names. There might be some required fields that they don't know, they're just guessing, which is some of the things we got into later on. But generally speaking, if 911 has gone in as somebody's phone number, somebody made a conscious decision to do that. So if you can stop those people doing that, then you need to try and think of the ways you can do that. And there are different ways of doing this, and we get into that later on. But ultimately, the reason this sort of becomes disjointed in different areas is because it fits well with the idea of this is your problem. The fact you're here today is a good start, because the next tip is to start right now. Your data isn't ever going to get any better. If you have a data set that is in the future, then you've got an industry-leading data set that is amazing. The last time this was 30% of people changed jobs. I actually think that statistic was from pre-pandemic. I would hazard a guess now that now we're in a virtual world and a lot of people do their jobs full-time remote that didn't previously, that's going to be a lot more than that. So that was a statistic about 3 or 4 years ago. Statistic, can't say that word at this time, right? So there is some quick wins. I'm going to go through them. We're going to do quick ways you can enforce some stuff. There is then longer term processes, and then there is just different directions and different thought processes that we're going to go through today. So the first thing that I'm going to disclaim, and I'm going to be open and honest about this, is that I am an ISV. I work for an ISV. I've seen all these situations here. So what I can do with that is I can use the experience that I've built up in a non-biased way and share that with you. What it also means is when I'm giving some examples of things that you can do, chances are I've got it pre-built. So I've probably been lazy and gone to that and just took a screenshot of those things. If I'm showing a product, I will explain there is other products that do it, blah, 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 blah. Just disclaiming myself, just to be open and honest with everybody, it's there. But the reason I can disclaim that as well is that I can say this, which is don't be scared to engage ISVs. I'm a techie and I will talk about this for hours. I mean, there's a reason why I'm giving up an hour of my night at 11 o'clock at night on a Wednesday night. That regardless of the fact that I get paid to do what I do in 9 to half 5. I also enjoy it. I have a passion for it. The people that are at those jobs also do the same thing. You are going to get salespeople. Every job has salespeople. But if you have questions, then they will give you their time, because whilst they may or may not want your business, they will still help you and have conversations, and they may still be able to offer you a direction on what you should go. If you explain problems they're going to have, they're going to try and offer you solutions that fit within what they've got. So I know that I've been on many a call and I've just sat there and I've given advice on things and things you should do it, and they haven't purchased our stuff, and I have absolutely no qualms with that whatsoever. So don't feel like just because this somebody else has built it already that you can't engage them. That's not true. Chances are, if anything, they want to show it off. And in the meantime, you may find that it works for you. So see ISVs as your friend, not the enemy, is what my tip in there is, which leads me on to the single customer view. So this is the big one. This is the dedupe data. This is the generic idea of don't have a duplicate in your system, which is also probably the hardest task that you'll come across. Particularly if you are embedded into your system that's already there. I know there was discussions prior to this call where people are looking at moving into their systems now, and there will be some sort of migration process, and there are ideal times to look at these. But that doesn't mean that you can't if you're not already in there. And so having duplicates in your system gives you problems in almost everywhere you can think of at some point or another, and I'm sure you've all fell foul of these at some point or another. The GDPR in the UK and the Europe in Europe is a big thing with regards to duplicate data. The CC, the California something Protection Act, and I think there might be another one across in the US now. I'm not up to date on all my US state law at the moment. And then the recent thing that I've added onto this that this never used to be on the slide deck was storage costs. Dataverse is not the cheapest platform. And if you have lots and lots and lots of duplicates in your system and you're not doing anything about it, actually that has a financial impact on your business as well. So duplicates are something that is definitely worth thinking about. It's worth being a huge area of focus. I've spoken to and dealt with businesses who have teams and their sole job is to put business processes in place to stop it, fix it, keep on top of it, and all that sort of stuff. So it really isn't too late if you're in your permanent environment, but it is, like I say, one of the longest things that you can do. And there is two things you need to do, which is fix the old ones and stop it happening again, because you don't want to do all the work at the start and then have to redo it again in 12 months' time because you didn't forward plan of where you're going for that. So try and think of the whole scope, the whole picture. Now, Dataverse and formerly Dynamics, because I was back in, so my history is back in Dynamics CRM 2011. Way back when, even back in CRM 4, Dataverse, as well as Dynamics 365, can do this partly for you. But whilst we know that the world evolves at an incredible rate, actually, this is 15 years of development within the Microsoft platform. I know I'll be nice about Microsoft because we've recorded and they may see this, so I can glad that you told me this was recorded, Kylie, so I can change what I'm saying ever slightly. But what you can see here is that this is 15 years of development in the duplicate detection area. And ultimately, you can find a duplicate based on exact match, first name, first characters, last characters, and that's about it. And the eagle-eyed view there on the screenshot may have noticed the one change that got added, which is exclude inactive matching records. So the point of this is to show that this is probably an area that the platform hasn't kept up with the rest of its advancements. As well as duplicate detection, this is finding them. So again, CRM 4, so this is 15 years. And if I'm honest, my argument is that even though the screen on the left will have been a much lower resolution in 2007, I can see less on the screen on the right because the fonts are bigger, and whilst it's probably more accessibility friendly, actually my job of fixing these duplicates is going to be harder because I can see less on the screen of what's there. And then merging as well. So when I found my duplicates, the process within Dataverse to fix these duplicates and bring them all together has changed. It's been a bit more updated, but I mean, still it's fairly limited in what it wants to be. So you can see on that example on the right hand side that if I'm picking main phone, I can pick between left and right and nowhere else. But what about if I would like to move main phone down to mobile phone, for example? Just little holes in the platform like that. Now, so my tip for that is Dataverse will do you a bit, but it isn't great out of the box. It is a model-driven heavy UI. This is a generic Dataverse session. This is a Power Platform user group. There is a wider world than model-driven. I came from a CRM world. I came from a Dynamics 365 world, so I'm sort of model-driven backwards, whereas I know a lot of people are Canvas apps and go that direction instead. But all this focus of the data management, I would say, is much more model-driven focused right now in the platform. You are very limited on the tables you can do it on. Account, contact, lead, and case are the only 4 that you can do most of this stuff on, particularly the merging. And even then, the lead and case, because of the way that Microsoft are billing this with regards to D365 sales and service and whatever it's called this week, the behavior is different on those. So lead, for example, now has actually some better duplicate detection that can only be used for lead. And they both have slightly different UIs for merging records compared to account and contacts. So there is it's a very difficult to explain direction that the platform takes with these right now, because if you're trying to train your users to keep on top of this data and to do it right, then you need to train on multiple different ways of doing it, depending on the angle that you're coming in from. So yeah, it's outdated, it's limited, and can struggle with duplicates. As you can see by the font sizing on there, I'm entirely non-biased by options that you've got with third-party investment. That's just happened to be a typo in there. But the best place to look for that is AppSource. If you are going to look at these ISVs speak through AppSource, go and take a look at what they've got options on there. So just a quick example of the sort of thing that you can see going from the 2 screen to now is that you can see that this is merging 4 records at a time. I can move data up and down, put it into the right places. You can see email 2, email 3, for example, that actually one of those records there has a slightly different email address, which is in the 3rd record there in the column. And out of the box, we would have to make a decision at some point that we would lose that email, whereas realistically, we don't want to lose that. That is valid data. And what you can do is you can shift that down to email 2, stuff like that. Like I say, there are other things on the market that will do these things as well. So there's another example of, you can see that Lewis and the Ronaldson's a colleague of mine, both his names are actually spelled incorrectly. So there's fuzzy matching there, which is logic that you wouldn't get in the out-of-the-box platform. And if I was to go on AppSource and do a search on that, there is a bunch on there. This is just doing a search for duplicate, and you can see there that there is 18 there. I mean, they're not all quite doing the same thing, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the first 12 at least are, if not more. So there is lots of things on the market for that. These companies have put probably decades worth of work into their platform. The chances are they've probably built it in depth than you will ever be able to. So my tip is to speak to them if it's an area that interests you. Now, away from saying custom view, it's a long time on one topic, but it is a very big topic that people need to think about. Now, this is generally theory-based, but again, it's got a Dataverse spin on it. Required fields. I am not a huge fan of required fields, and I will put you forward my use case for them now. And there is some use cases for them, but generally I will try and avoid it, especially if it's a free text input box, because you are not policing the data and you are causing a problem whenever people put that data in. Lookups, if you can use a lookup instead, then that is better, as long as you are maintaining the source. If you have a lookup and one of the options in the lookup is other, then you've made it worse already because you have an issue there. You could introduce an if other, what is it going to be? And whilst that again would work, you've then introduced a free text box into other, which then means any analysis on that data becomes very, very difficult, because you're again down to the user who's inputting that data in there. So, and if you're going to look at chasing this way up the chain into Power BI or whatever and doing any sort of analysis on it, the second that you've introduced any text input boxes into your stuff, then you can't really do any analysis based on those text fields. And definitely avoid using required on factual fields where you can, which is an interesting one that I think is very useful to think about. So what do I mean by that? Telephone number on contact shouldn't be required, because there may be a situation where you only have their email, or you may have met them in real life, or you may have done something like that you've got a way of getting in touch with them, and they want to be on your system, but because you've made phone number required, they're going to have a phone number of 911 or 123 or something like that. Whereas probability on opportunity, you can see why you would need that. You are just going to use that as an analysis-based thing, and you are going to use that within the statistics that you take. So it doesn't harm anybody by someone guessing it, doesn't get things wrong, but it also doesn't get you into trouble. So required on opinionated ones rather than factual ones is my little tip on there. And if this is a Dataverse specific problem, don't forget that that is not difficult to ignore entirely. So if anybody knows of the sort of secret Chrome tools that you can install and you can do clever things, then you can get around most of this entirely. And if you're using Power Automate, if you're using portals or Canvas apps to speak to the same data source, then again, you've got a problem that actually not necessarily is required as you think they are. But there are situations where you still will have required fields, and that's fine. And I wonder if there's anybody on the call. There's probably, I'm going to hazard a guess, what, 17, 20, 22, 23 people on the call. Somebody's probably had this question, which is, can we add a field and can we now make this additional field required because I want to start and do an analysis on it? My tip for that is just say no. Every single time, say no. Because all this will do is promote bad data quality. Because of the way the platform works, and it's an unfortunate side effect, is that the second they go into a record that has a field that is now required that wasn't previously, they now cannot save that record if they've made a change elsewhere without populating that field. And if that field is phone number or email address or something like that, or source campaign. Source campaign is a good example. What if it's a source campaign of a record that was made 10 years ago? They're going to put something nonsensical, which just degrades the quality of what you're doing. So don't do that. This is probably one of my biggest bugbears, and this is updating required fields. And again, there is use cases for it, and there will be times when you will twist my arm and I will go, okay, then we will let you do it. But if you still need to do that, then there is ways of doing that separately. So business rules or JavaScript make it so. An example that we've had, and we've genuinely done this internally, is that there was a field that I eventually succumbed to and allowed them to make it required at a later date. But the deal was that if it was under a specific criteria, that was when it would be made required. So we enforced that with business rules instead. So the UI didn't necessarily stop them doing that. So there is ways of doing it, but my tip is try and avoid it where you can, because it generally will cause you more damage than it will good. What's that mean? 25 past. Okay, fine. Populated fields. It's sort of linked to that one. Just because they've got populated data doesn't mean they have good data quality. There is tools in XrmToolBox, which we'll go into later on, that will do analysis on every single field and will show you the percentage of the fields that you've got data in. Doesn't mean that is necessarily useful data, because I would bet someone's seen that at least, or how many tests at test.coms have you got in your system, or how many people live at ... Ultimately, there are ways of this data getting in the system, and this could be from a marketing form, it could be from a marketing query that's synced in from another external system, whatever. But the point is, I would imagine everybody at some point has seen at least one instance of something like this, which is somebody ultimately fudging the system to get where they want to be. So don't use the fact that a field is populated as any sort of data quality measure, because realistically it's not. So what you would want to be doing instead is validating the data that goes in as early as possible as you can in the chain. And if you can get it to the original person that's putting it in, then that's even better. You want it to be as close to source as possible. And when I use the generic term of validate, the more accurate that you can validate that data, then the better quality of data is going to be over time. So I changed a slide just for the session to be, because we would call it a plaster, and I'm not sure people would know what that is. So we're regex. So regex is a band-aid, not a fix. So testexample.com looks like a valid email address, but realistically isn't. Same for 555.13456. That data looks correct. If you were to do some sort of regex validation, then it would pass those things. But realistically, actually, if you tried to phone them or email them, you would probably get a bounce back or a no dial tone if you were to try those things. So there is options, and there is people again out there that will go a lot extra step further. There is things that will validate emails in real time. There is things that will tell you, yes, this is a phone number and it's registered to the AT&T network and blah, 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 all those things. So I'm not saying regex is a bad idea. If it's what you've got and if it fits with your business needs, then absolutely it's better than nothing. But the better you can get, the more accurate you can get, then if it's within your realm to do so, then I would suggest doing that. And what you need to think about is all the points of entry. So with the Power Platform focus on this, we've got model-driven portals, Canvas apps, we've got Power Automate, you've got Logic apps, you've got custom integrations, you've got all sorts of things. You got, I mean, F&O dual write. God, you could the list is endless of how data can now get into Dataverse because of the fantastic way that the platform is now so openly available. But with that comes the issues of making a consistent approach across them all, because if you know that let's say your users, for example, are trying to phone a lead and they required fields, for example. So let's say you've got phone validation on there and you want to ensure that they have a valid phone number in there. Let's say that is a situation. If one of your users happens to find out that if they add the contact in through the web portal and it doesn't do the validation, but it will get in there for them to look like they've done it in Dataverse through the model-driven app, then they will find that route and they will take it and they will abuse it, because water will always leak if it finds a hole. So this sounds like a very non-trustworthy of users. Generally, that's the way I live, is I will not trust users to do it correctly. They probably will, and I'm probably being more harsh than I need to be. But if I'm the harsh one, then I'm happy to take the rap if they do or don't do it. So consistent validation across all the points of entry is very useful. So yeah, stop saving bad data. So specifically Dataverse, specifically model-driven apps. For the add notification is a fantastic little tool, which will stop people in real time. It will stop the save. It will just have a nice UI that people will associate it with. So if this is something that's available to you, you could use it anywhere you want to. It's a nice little library that I would suggest people look at in JavaScript if you are a dev and like this area. But the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize this can do, because I don't think this is that commonly used, and again, you can't use it unless you specifically written code, and I can't think of any use cases where Microsoft themselves have used this in the platform other than made it available for third parties, is the recommendations. So what you can do with this is you can pick up ideas of things that happen and say, did you mean to do this, or do you want to pre-populate it with this? So an example that we've seen of this is if somebody is a supplier, for example, then automatically set another field somewhere else to do that, but give them the option to pick to do that rather than actually just enforce it, because that might want to be overridden. You're just trying to save people time ultimately. So this is an example here of a tool that we've got which has picked up a typo in Adam W and said, did you mean to put Adam W, and fixed it. What would happen there when I press the apply is that would take that data and put it into that field. So the user wouldn't need to go and type that, wouldn't need to do it. And we've just, again, eradicated the bad data at the point it was entered. But with the recommendations, there's a whole host of things that you can do and set fields and do these different ideas. So it's entirely bespokely written, and you can make it very powerful and save yourself and your users a lot of time. Which goes on to my next point, which is key presses, which is the less key presses that you can make people use in their system, whatever platform they're in, then the less chances you've got that they can make a poor decision on the data they're putting in. For the folks of us that know the platform from a little bit older and remember the pre-unified interface days, which makes me feel old when I will speak to lots of people now that won't even know what that phrase means anymore. They had a thing called autocomplete, which was for developers, that was an on-key press change event that you could do, that you could fire. So you can see there that I'm typing out an address and it automatically does it, and that was native in the platform. It got removed, so it was nice. But there was a long time in the platform when there was simply nothing that was really available as quite integrated as that for other than sort of web resources or things that are a bit disjointed. So it was deprecated, it got took away, but it was great. Now, the good thing is the platform has changed again since then, which means that PCF is about. So the Power Apps component framework, if anybody doesn't know what that is, that means you can ultimately override any field, how it looks. You can at this point, you can also override data sets. You can override little grids within data sets. You can give a similar behavior to model driven into Canvas apps, into Power Apps portals, because that's now supported in all those 3 areas. And it just gives you much more power. So what it lets you do is bring this idea of this autocomplete back, because you've now got an entirely blank canvas that will be hosted within the platform that you can use it. It took me a while to understand the concept of PCFs. If you're new to the platform, it might be a bit complex the way it starts right now, but you'll very soon see the use case of this. And a good example of that is this. I think this is a fantastic PCF that I've used in a few places, which is actually what it looks like is an on-off field. What it really is behind the scenes, though, is a date field. So what that lets me do is that lets users go, yeah, I've done it. And they go, great. But actually, behind the scenes, that's just stored them a date, and they didn't have to think about the date. It took a timestamp. So I can now go, yeah, my users have completed that phone call. But truth be told, if I was going up behind the scenes, I can actually see the date they completed it instead. So that's a usage of PCF to just rethink the way that the platform is working on that ever so slightly. PCF Gallery is free. It is third party, but generally, if it's on there, is free. It's community driven. It's community built. In fact, I think that's what Jamie's just mentioned there. Thank you, Jamie. So yes, PCF is free. It is they're open source. So if you have open source issues, you can take the code. You can edit to make it fit for you. All these people often give their things out to the community for free at this point. Okay, did you say you configure recommendations to JavaScript? I've done a simple one to business rules, but I don't think no. So recommendations are done in the JavaScript within themselves, so but you can't dynamically change them. Although you could have multiple recommendations on the same form, possibly. I don't know. Sort of a half answer that I don't fully know. Generally, apply is the one I use on them. Standardized formatting, and this goes back to what I said earlier, which is when you've got free text boxes, you have people entering it, which means they enter data differently in different ways. Phone numbers is an amazing example of that. The amount of different ways that I've seen phone numbers formatted is absolutely incredible. If you can pick a standard for it and get people to enter it, then great. Hopefully they will. Chances are there'll be times when they don't. So if you can also standardize it, even better. Again, a lot of this depends on resource for having the people be able to input these things for you, having a set of rules that you can apply if that is applicable to you, and having the users be able to train on how to use these platforms. Now, having standardized formatting can help in all sorts of different places. So advanced finds. If you've ever tried to do an advanced find for somebody via a phone number, that's so hard. It's ridiculous because, like I say, you end up with doing all sorts of starts with, contains with, ands and ors and whatever, and it's really difficult to do. And if you've got any sort of CTI, so I never know what it stands for, call telephony integration, that's my guess. If you have that, sometimes they need phone numbers in specific formats. E164 is an example. I think that's 1-3-4 or something like that. So yeah, if you can also standardize to that. So an example of a plugin that we've got internally is that this is UK example here, I'm afraid, but I've put a UK mobile number in and I've automatically formatted that on save to an international standard, and I've put the international standard prefix in so I can be sure that works with all the platforms that I've got. What that means is that I don't really care ultimately what a user puts in, because I will fix the mistakes they make and try and make it consistent across the system. There we go. I will speed up because I'm running out of time. Rethink Dashboards. Dashboards is, I've still used old dashboards. There's Power BI dashboards, but I still think dashboards within model-driven apps are underrated. Because one thing I got taught I genuinely think I learned this my first ever user group in the UK, was that empty dashboards are just as effective as full ones, because it's your to-do list, it's your things to keep on top of. If you can go on a dashboard and you can see that grid is empty and that grid is empty and that grid is empty, that you're doing your job right and you're on top of what you're doing. So if you can have a data required aspect and list those records that don't quite have enough data to match it, then this is something that you can use to throw way back to an early slide for your performance reviews. Help people know where they need to fix their own data. So as an example, again, it's an old screenshot, but we have a my contact needs cleansing within our own internal system that were just missing just enough data that meant that I was doing the wrong job and I had to improve it. So this was a real dashboard there. So if that was a blank, then I've done a good job. So that was, Yeah, that was my phone number. Yes, Jamie, that may not be my mobile number. So yeah, the joys. Existing data. So most of your data goes untouched in a day. 99.9% of any heavy data goes untouched. It might be read, but it necessarily isn't used. And some of that data needs constant updates. So if you've got any business information in your system and you're using credit limits, credit ratings, if you've got the do not call list, or in the UK, we've got the TPS or CTPS. And unfortunately, it's the way of life that people move on, people die, and people move house. Move house is less of an unfortunate thing. And that data changes all the time. And if there is processes that you can look at putting that in place to keep on top of that, then great, fantastic. And until a few years ago, people had to build custom process in place for that. They had to extract the data out, use a third party, put it back in again, IIS or the data factories or whatever. And all a bit of a pain. Thankfully, Power Automate was a bit more of a game changer for that, and Power Automate puts that power now in other people's hands. Because what you can do there is do things like that. So you can, this again, example of our connector in there, but the point is, we can go in and every 6 months we can go and check that everybody's email addresses are still correct and they haven't moved on from that business, and that email would still get to them. It's an example of a very simple way you could do that, and that takes minutes to implement within your system. And then widening that to Power Apps connectors, I think that one of the problems that we have here is that I think the term data source within a connector is often misleading, and it took me ages to realize this. I used to call a Power Automate within a Canvas app and pass the data back. Actually, if you pass in certain connectors into Canvas apps, what it does ultimately is expose those actions as, if we think in Excel logic, which is what people often do when they think about Canvas apps, is that it adds that in as like methods and things we can call. So for example, now what I've got here is that I've got an on select. When I press the button, it goes and calls the connector. It just says is valid and just calls that. So there's no flows involved, but it's calling the connector. So technically, this bit here is a data source. It's a bit. I think the naming convention, it causes more confusion what that can be. But I think that's very useful. So what that has allowed me to do is that now says that if this is an invalid email, I'm going to give it a red box. And I've now tried to recreate the behavior that model-driven apps naturally get, and it's much more easy to get in Canvas apps. So this is all to do with that consistent approach across them all. Because we're a Dataverse session today, XrmToolBox, I'm not going to go through XrmToolBox today because there's lots of people in this call that have done some fantastic sessions on XrmToolBox. But if you don't know what it is, my suggestion would be go and have a look at it, go and have a play with it, fetch XML builders, a start, and go work your way up from there. Is my tip on there. I think if I got to the quarter to on the hour, I might go over slightly in a few minutes, Kylie, but if I go over, feel free to interrupt me and shut me down. I have no problems with that. Otherwise, I'll just keep mumbling on for now.
You're fine. Take your time. Nothing,
cool.
Nothing coming up after this except your bedtime, right?
My bedtime, yes. Well, I can't hear crying, so that's a good sign. So metadata. So, I mean, ultimately, we spent a long time saying that Dynamics 365 is more than a database, and Dataverse, CDS, Dataverse Pro, whatever it's called at the time, is more than a database. And then the terminology changed and we started calling it the same names as databases, like tables and rows. But what that means is that there is cleverness behind the scenes of the metadata. And when you make new fields in Dataverse and you give it a max length or a maximum or a min value, some of those things are enforced at database level, some are enforced at metadata level, and that can change over time. And a little caveat that you may or may not have known on that is that the changing that metadata will allow you to do that without any validation whatsoever of your existing data. So what I mean by that, if you were to change the length of a text field, if you were to change the min max of a phone number, or if you were to delete some options from a choice, should have updated that slide on there, what happens is the system will not go and fix the data that now doesn't match that new set of validation. So you end up with bad data in your system that isn't correct. And the worst thing that happens even more so is that if you change that and the record that you're now on a record that now doesn't match the new amendments, that record is now in a broken state and you have to go and fix those other things that weren't in your scope to fix. It's a bit like adding the required fields on at a later date. So what I mean by that is that this is a column that I've changed, and I've made this column from 150 to 120 characters, for example. So I've reduced the length of this column. and that system's gone through absolutely fine, and that's done that for me, and that now won't let me add anything that is 120 or more in length. However, if I go to an older record that has a really long name in it, I then just change the phone number or something else entirely irrelevant, I can't save that record now because I've now exceeded the maximum number of characters. So it's now hitting that enforcement on me there. So just be aware that when you're changing metadata, that whilst it will just go through for you and look okay, you may be causing more problems for your users down the line, because if they see this, they're probably going to raise a ticket with you and go, what's going on? What do I really want to do here? So think cleverly when you're changing your metadata. For the techies that care about this, so increasing size or boundary. So if you make it bigger, it will edit it at a database level. If you make it smaller, it only is done at the app server level, which means the database still holds the older values, and then they don't sync together. And if you use, is it still going? I know it's deprecated. The data export service, and quite possibly the T-SQL endpoint now, I don't know how that will handle on that, is that because that is essentially a database copy, when it builds the metadata, it goes, make a column of 100, and then it tries to put 120 characters into that column, and then it breaks and all sorts, and you just get down this horrible mess. So full cycle back to a few slides ago, that there is an XrmToolBox tool that I wrote, so I know a little bit about this one, that will do those checks for you. So what this is doing here, this has gone to check. This has gone in this example here. It's gone to check that the minimum value for this, I tested it and set the minimum to be 9. This now found 250 records that had the value of 8 in it. So it had not enforced it, but what it meant is this data now doesn't match the metadata that it could possibly be. Pick lists and strings, things like that. So you can see there that third one down, a website URL, and a website URL that's now too long. So this tool lets you go and find them and fix those data things. If you do want to make that change, you can go and fix it retrospectively. The final one, I think, is, it sounds silly, look at your data, but try and look at it from a different platform. A 5,000 plus is not a very useful way of quantifying your data and your data problems, which is generally, if you're looking at in the grids within model driven, that's two limitations you're going to get to. And there is certain things that would be nice to do that, because of the fetch XML limitation, you just can't really do it. So an example here, actually, the account has a primary contact as a lookup field by default in the system, and contact has an account. They potentially have different fields, and primary contact is a good example of this. There's nothing anywhere that enforces that a primary contact of an account has to be in that account. But how do you find that out? There is no real way of using the platform to find those problems out. But now you sort of can a bit more. So if there is this T-SQL endpoint, which is what I mentioned earlier, what this T-SQL endpoint is if you've got a SQL history on there, if you understand what that's doing, this sort of turns Dataverse back into a SQL server that you can go on and you can just run normal commands on it. Now, it's read-only. It is a copy of your data in a read-only database, so you can't do anything advanced on it. But you can now start doing clever dynamic SQL queries that if you've got any sort of SQL background on it, then it makes it much more powerful for you, but with a read-only limitation. Now, if you want to take that a little bit further, and if you do have a SQL background, which I know a lot of people do, then there is a tool again within XrmToolBox called SQL for CDS. And what this is a way of doing very, very, very clever SQL commands, and it will translate it to either some code behind the scenes or fetch XML or a bunch of clever stuff. But what this also lets you do is do updates and deletes and inserts, and just a better SQL language than you've had for a long time. It sort of goes back to on-premise days when you may or may not have had access to the SQL Server database, but in a fully supported way. For me, as the data person that looks at data in batch, SQL for CDS has without a doubt been a game changer for me in my role. I have saved genuinely hundreds, if not thousands of hours by using this tool. So it's a good one. So for example, how would you, in the normal system, deactivate all contacts from all inactive accounts? How would you delete all these that have been merged? I mean, fine, you could possibly do in Power Automate, but they're still fiddly, still take some time. And then a very more specific one, I don't know how you would do this, is how would you find all fields in your system that use a specific shared global option set or global choice, stuff like that. This is a way that you can start looking at your data in depth without a 5,000 limitation, because you've got group bys and order bys and clever stuff. And yeah, looking at your data is the way where I really end this, because you need to think outside of it. Canvas apps are, quite frankly, terrible for looking at data in batch, because you police it, and no matter what happens with delegation, the way it slows down and loads it and whatever, you can't really do any analysis at all. Power BI can, but it's often either not real time, or it's a point in time, or it's Power BI that I don't know, which is the truth behind it. Whereas me having a mass SQL background, or even export to Excel, something like that, is more useful than that. So try and look for patterns, and try and see your quick wins, and try and see columns that look poor. And ultimately, that's it. That's where I'm ending there. So, floor, if anybody's got any more problems, I'm not going straight to bed at midnight. And yeah, I can open the floor. People come off mic, got any questions, or I'd love to hear any thoughts.